time to do my May wrap-up game. I'm going to start, as usual, with my 5 favorites. So let's start with Kristin Hannah's The Great Alone. I read this for my 12 and 12 friends recommending 12 books to read over the course of the year. I did the 12 and 12 with my Bookstagram crowd and my Facebook crowd, and so far my Facebook crowd has delivered so strongly. So many of my favorite books this year have come from that group of recommendations, and this is one of them. So this is Kristin Hannah's The Great Alone. It is about a man and a woman in a dysfunctional relationship. He goes to Vietnam and comes back with a lot of PTSD, but of course it's undiagnosed. This was not something that was diagnosed at the time. And he is very unpredictable. They're raising a daughter. It's the daughter's story. It's from the daughter's perspective. He ends up taking the family to Alaska, and they're very isolated, and everywhere he goes there's trouble, and Alaska is no different, except that they are so isolated. And this ends up being a Romeo and Juliet story, a coming of age story, a family drama story, a human versus nature story. It's everything you want in a book. It's everything I want in a book. And I had kind of sworn off Kristin Hannah. I really don't like it when I feel like an author's gimmick is to try and make me cry. I hate that so much. If there's a book and the story naturally makes me cry, I love it. If there's a book and it feels like the author is doing everything they can do just to make you cry, I'm thinking Frederick Bachman here, like, looking at you, dude. I don't like it. And I was feeling like Kristin Hannah was that kind of author. So I had sworn off of her, really. But then this was recommended to me, and I had vowed that I would read each of the books that was recommended. I would at least give them a go. I would at least read 250 pages. Wow, I loved this book. I loved it. I loved it so much. So yeah, that's my first favorite read of the month. My next favorite read of the month was Lunar Love by Lauren Cohn Jessen. I think the writing on my computer is very small. I just have a little image up, but you can see the picture here, and if I've said her name incorrectly, I'm sorry. I listened to this. So when Book of the Month sends out their options, I pick one, and then I put the others on hold at the library so that I can read through them as suggested reads. And it always takes a long time for these books to come in. I think Lunar Love was from January, and it just came in for me from the library. And I listened to it and absolutely loved it. We're talking like a Pride and Prejudice type of vibe, plus maybe a little bit of book shop around the corner. You've Got Mail vibes. It is just so sweet. I loved it so much. I would really like to buy a copy of both of these books. I listened to both of them from the library, but I really think that they are books that I would like to reread in the future. If you're looking for a sweet, funny, smart romance, Lunar Love. Highly recommend. I read The Last Word by Taylor Adams. I read this book in one afternoon. I couldn't stop reading. At the end of every chapter, you are compelled to keep going. And I think what I loved all of the twists and turns, and I loved all of the red herrings. I loved all the wrong directions. I loved the way that from the very beginning, you are on high anxiety alert throughout the reading of this. You are freaked out. It's a freaky, freaky book. But what I really loved, without spoilers, is the final ending. There are so many ends. It's one of those books where it's like, and now the story is over. Oh, but wait, there's more. Now the story is over. Oh, but wait, there's more. Oh, but wait, there's more. I really enjoyed that. I have heard some people talk about how they didn't really care for that very much, but I really loved it because I felt like Taylor Adams did it right. But the final ending, so satisfying. I loved it. I loved this book so much. If you are looking for a fast-paced thriller, especially if you review books, this is the one. Basic premise: woman isolated on the Oregon coast, writes a review of a book, of a Kindle Unlimited self-published thriller and horror. It's a negative review, and the writer responds to her, and then things start happening. But nothing is going to be what you think it is. Nothing is going to be what you think it is. Except for one or two things which you think you're smart in figuring out, but really they're handed to you. Taylor Adams is so good. So good. Wow. Well done, Taylor Adams. Well done. Then I read this one, The Beginning of Everything. This is an arc, and it is coming out. I'll put the date down here because I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's being released fairly soon. And this is by Jackie Fraser. This was my very first Jackie Fraser book. I am familiar with the titles of other books, the covers of other books that she's written. I know she wrote one about a bookshop, a bookseller. This one is about a woman, and it drew me in from the very beginning because this is a middle-aged woman who's obviously educated and capable, and it starts out and she's what they say in England, living rough, sleeping rough. She's homeless and she's living in a cemetery. It starts there. She very shortly after that uses some skills for lock breaking that she has. She's so interesting from the very beginning because you don't know the context for any of these things. So she uses some pins and things to break a lock, or to open a lock that will take her into what she knows is a empty house. The house has just been sold, the people moved out, and she's relying on the fact that it will take a while for someone to move in. So basically, she's squatting. You don't know why. You don't know what's going on. She gets a job while she's squatting in this house. She gets a job washing dishes at a local restaurant. Maura, the owner of the restaurant, realizes that she's eating the leftover food off of the plates of the customers, and so starts sending her home with leftovers from the restaurant. And then after about a month, this all happens in the first few pages of the book, but after about a month, the person who just purchased the house shows up, finds her squatting, and things unfold from there. This is a delightful, compulsive, compelling read. It is a love story, but more than that, it is just a human story. It's just excellent storytelling, and it really feels like just slice of life. It's a really special book, very calm, and yet there's lots of conflict, internal conflict, and such a happy ending, and such a believable story. If you're looking at all for a story about two older individuals falling in love, this is a great one. But it is more so about establishing trust, I guess, would be the way to put it. And also, if you really love houses that revolve around, if you really love books that revolve around houses, this is one that is very special. There's so many descriptions of decorating this house, going shopping for things for the house, decorating another apartment, just digging through attics and things. There's just so many little details that make this book just really, really special. Speaking of houses, my fifth favorite read of the month was Grady Hendrix, How to Sell a Haunted House. And this was so Grady Hendrix. I know Grady Hendrix is not for everyone, but wow, I love Grady Hendrix. Every time I read another book by him, I think, who are you? He's so great. Because he's writing horror, and it is truly horror. It is horrifying, terrifying stuff. In this one, there are trigger warnings for puppets and dolls and just all those things that you find so creepy. But he's actually writing about relationships. This one is about a brother and a sister. This one is about a daughter and her parents. This one is about the secrets that we keep and how they animate and destroy if we don't bring them into the light. And it's about the things that we hold on to that we don't know we hold on to. It's about the things that really kind of divide us. It's about family. And this book is just so well written. I listened to this on audio. Again, I want to get a copy of it. I don't know when, but I definitely will keep my eyes out for a used copy of it. I want to have it. I want to be able to read it again because it is just so wonderful. It is hilarious. I mean, it is really hilarious. And I have heard some people complain about how the brother and the sister are at odds with each other and it feels like too much or too repetitive. I have to tell you, that's just for like maybe 20 pages near the mid-beginning. If you didn't get past that part, you've missed everything. So I just really love Grady Hendrix and the way that he uses horror to talk about the most human of human things. And yeah, Grady Hendrix, top of my list. Now, those are my 5 favorites. The Great Alone, Lunar Love, The Last Word, The Beginning of Everything, and How to Sell a Haunted House. I also have 3 runner-ups. One is Flying Solo by Linda Holmes. I listened to this on audio, and I wasn't going to because I really didn't like Evie Drake Starts Over. I mean, I really didn't like it. In fact, I didn't like it so much that I made an entire video about books that were better than it. I wasn't going to listen or read the next Linda Holmes book, but the cover got me. I mean, look at that cover. It's so pretty. And so I was rearranging some furniture and doing a deep clean and going through my wardrobe and things like that on one long weekend, and just put it on because I thought, you know, I'll give it half an hour, and if it doesn't get me, then it doesn't get me. By the way, half an hour for me is 2 hours because I always listen at least 2.5 speed. So I'll give it an hour is what I was going to give it. And I listened to the entire thing that afternoon. And I loved it so much. There's like a mystery element. It's again, an older couple. This must be a new thing happening in publishing right now. They're focusing on middle-aged and slightly older, but not elderly people in their books. So it was a slightly older couple, and it was a mystery. It was about this woman and her aunt. It was about ducks, wooden ducks. And it was really, really intriguing, delightful, entertaining, funny, believable. I loved it. All the things that drove me nuts about Evie Drake were, in my mind, fixed in Flying Solo. I know that Flying Solo has significantly lower ratings than Evie Drake. I think that tracks. Everybody loved Evie Drake Starts Over, and I despised it. Most people aren't loving Flying Solo, and I adored it. So, there you have it. Then I also want to give a shout out to one of the books I read from Mary Shelley May, which is The Case of the Married Woman by Antonia Fraser. This is the story of Caroline Norton, and it was so readable. I've thought about it so much since finishing reading it. I just really feel like I walked away knowing Caroline Norton. And if you want to know more about this book and this story, I might mention it in my wrap up here. I'm not sure. But you can definitely hear me talk about it in the Mary Shelley May reading vlog that I'm also posting. I talk about it at length there, and I just really, really loved it. And I need to read more Antonia Fraser because this is my second Antonia Fraser. I read her long Marie Antoinette biography, which I now want to reread. But I need to read more Antonia Fraser because I just really, really love the way that she tells history. And then finally, I have another favorite. Which was another arc that I happened to read. I think this one comes out in August, but I'll put the actual date down here. And this is The Favor by Adele Griffin. And this one was so much fun. I just could not read this book without imagining that one of the main characters was Jennifer Coolidge, everyone. One of the main characters reminded me so much of Jennifer Coolidge, and I don't know if she was supposed to be that way, but that is who I imagined through the whole thing, and it made my read just so enjoyable. This is a story about, so trigger warnings for conception issues, but this is about a woman and her husband. They really want to have a baby, but they're having a really hard time. They've spent so much money, they've gone into debt, they just can't do it. She sells high-end clothing, like high-end clothing in a consignment shop, and this Jennifer Coolidge character just kind of runs into the store one evening and buys everything. And then, and when I say everything, I mean everything. Everything, books and everything that's in there, stuff that's not for sale, she buys it. And in this way, she kind of forces this woman to join her life, and then she starts to kind of push her around a little bit, using the leverage of their friendship as a means of getting what she needs. So this woman becomes like her personal stylist without being her personal stylist, and she becomes her, she calls her over for dinner, but really she ends up staying, she gets dinner and she gets hangout time, but she also ends up just hemming this dress, things like this. But also, an offer is made to carry a child. That is what I will say. And there's all sorts of drama about children and fashion and clothes and relationships and manipulation and boundaries and marriage and friendships. Everything is in this book. It is hilarious and also very serious. And in the very end, twists and turns galore. This is one you want to read the epilogue on. You definitely want to read the epilogue. If you are one of those people, and I don't understand you people, but if you're one of those people who's like, I never read the epilogue, the book should end where the book ends. No, the book ends at the end of the epilogue. That's where the book ends. Read the epilogue. Anyway, so these are my 5 favorite books. The Great Alone, Lunar Love, The Last Word, Beginning of Everything, How to Sell a Haunted House, Flying Solo, The Case of the Married Woman, and The Favor. My 5 favorite books of the month. And they're such good stories. All of them such good stories. Now, if you're going to stick around for the game, I had to spin the wheel 8 times. So we have 8 questions that I will be answering for you. And here we go. First time I spun the wheel, I got Lunar Love. The number associated with Lunar Love was 37, and that prompt is, which book had your favorite character? I've already spoken about this book, so I will just say that the female character and her name escapes me now, but the female character in The Beginning of Everything by Jackie Fraser is my absolute favorite character of the month. I loved this woman. I loved her story. I loved the way she was written. I loved how knowledge about her is just kind of slowly given to the reader. You just dive into her sleeping rough in a cemetery and you can't stop reading from there. So absolutely loved that main character. Then I spun the wheel and I got How to Create the Perfect Wife. Spoiler alert for this one, that formula falls through. There was no formula that worked for How to Create the Perfect Wife. This is a weird true story if you want to read some nonfiction. Maybe keep that in the back of your mind for Nonfiction November. But the prompt associated with that was number 26, and that was, tell us about the author of the 15th book you finished reading. So the 15th book I finished reading was Mrs. Porter Calling by A.J. Pierce. This was another arc. This is the 3rd book in that Miss Bird series. The Dear Miss Bird World War II advice columnist series. And this was a sweet, wonderful book. It is written by A.J. Pierce. Here's a picture of A.J. Pierce. I could not find a lot of personal information about her. I just saw on her website she's an author. She lives in London. Not super interesting. If this had been a different book, it could have been more interesting, but there she is in all her glory, Ms. A.J. Pierce. And if you haven't read Dear Ms. Bird, then I really think you should. The second book was a little bit too serious for me in comparison to Ms. Bird. Dear Ms. Bird is also serious, but had a real balance of lighthearted hopefulness. The second book was a little bit less so, and Mrs. Porter Calling came to me on NetGalley, and I went ahead and read it, and I'm glad that I did because it took me back to those feelings of Dear Mrs. Bird. So if you, like me, were a little put off by the second book, strongly recommend you give the third book a try when it comes out on this date. I spun the wheel again, and this time it was Free Water by Amina Lumen Dawson, and the prompt that went with this one was number 32, the fastest read and the slowest read. This doesn't necessarily have anything at all to do with the length of the book. It's just which one went really quick for me and which one went really slowly. And the quickest would be the last word. I read this book in an afternoon. Not because I had intended to, but because I could not stop. Loved every word of it. It was compulsive. And the book that took me the longest was the slowest outside of The Last Man. So The Last Man was definitely the book that I read the slowest, but that was partly due to the fact that it was a buddy read, so I had to read it in prescribed chunks. It was really slow anyway, though. But the second runner-up for that was The Seven Moons of Molly Almeida. I read this book for book club, and this book was not for me. It is written in the second person. Nothing in the second person has ever been for me. So when I started reading it, I automatically knew I am not going to like this. I read it all the way to the end. It is overly populated with too many characters. It has weird pacing. Because you've got to stop the actual story over and over and over and over again to hear the stories of all these other characters. It's written in the second person, and, yeah, I just didn't get on with this book. It takes place in Sri Lanka, which is awesome. I love a book set, on or near the subcontinent. I lived in India. I love books set in India. I know Sri Lanka is a different kingdom, but the culture really, or many similarities, and just really, really still disliked this book greatly. It was not for me. It was literary magical realism, and I just think that's not my jam. This had a rough start from the beginning, and yeah. No, just not for me. Slowest read. I did finish it though. Yay me. Then I spun the wheel again, and I got Meet the Austins by Madeleine L'Engle. Now, this was definitely a favorite read of the month, but I didn't include it in my favorite reads because it was a reread, and I knew it was a favorite read already. The prompt associated with this was number 28. Tell us about the antagonist of the second book you read this month. The second book I read this month was Lunar Love. And I would say, so because this is kind of like a Pride and Prejudice story, I would say that the two protagonists, the guy and the girl, take turns being antagonists as well. And I don't want to tell you too much because I don't want to ruin the story, but just think Pride and Prejudice and think how in Pride and Prejudice, Darcy and Elizabeth are both their best, proponent and their own worst enemy. And you will understand how antagonism works in Lunar Love as well. I spun the wheel again, and this time I got The Beginning of Everything by Jackie Fraser, and the prompt was number 7. Choose a book and pair it with a piece of art. So I read The Luckiest Girl by Beverly Cleary. This would have also been a favorite read, but again, it was a reread. I knew that I would love this book. And I absolutely did. This is The picture, I picked a Norman Rockwell. I picked a girl and a boy because The Luckiest Girl is definitely a love story, and it is definitely set in the 1950s, and it is definitely reminiscent of the image that you can see here. I spun the wheel again, and this time The Last Word by Taylor Adams came up. The prompt associated with that was number 8, choose a book and pair it with a film. So I chose The Favor, which I've already told you a little bit about, and I paired it with A Simple Favor. Now, I will say that A Simple Favor, which also has a book, by the way, if you haven't read the book, you've only seen the movie, then I recommend it. If you've only read the book and you haven't seen the movie, then I recommend it. Picked A Simple Favor, not because they both have the word favor in the title, but that does kind of connect them. Also because they both have that feeling of lightheartedness, but really sinister plot. I will say that A Simple Favor is much more sinister than The Favor. The Favor definitely goes a different direction, 100%. And yet they are both dealing with something more sinister than the tone may indicate at the start. Then I spun the wheel again, and I got The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. This was number 3, and the number 3 prompt is ship 2 characters from 2 different books you read this month and explain. So I actually picked Lucretia from The Marriage Portrait, and I would ship her with the oldest son in Meet the Austins, Peter, because in The Marriage Portrait, Lucretia is a 15-year-old girl, and she is in a marriage with a person who is trying to maybe murder her. And I just think that she would do better with our sweet, dear 1950s Peter Austin, who is also around 15 years old and totally a normal and annoying brother to his younger sister, Vicky, but I think would be a much nicer 15-year-old for Lucretia to date than her gross older husband, who is maybe trying to murder her. Happier endings for Lucretia. Then I spun the wheel again, and I got Caro. Then the prompt associated with Caro is our last prompt for this video, and that was what's a book you didn't get to but wanted to. And I actually have a physical copy of it. I did not, once again, get to Jane Loudon's A Tale of the 22nd Century, The Mummy, and I really wanted to get to this, so I might actually just try to read this in June. I have this physical copy, I have an audiobook copy, and I really want to read it. Let's just look at the back. In the early 19th century, England was gripped by an excitement for the Pharaonic. The Napoleonic invasion of Egypt had unearthed treasures and mysteries that spread through a public eager for more. By 1821, the public unwrapping of Egyptian mummies in a theater near Piccadilly drew excited crowds. But it was not only this new obsession with the exotic that gripped the public. With the publication in 1818 of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, a new thrill had been found: the Gothic. From these twin obsessions comes Jane Loudon's The Mummy, published anonymously in 3 volumes when the author was only 17 years old. The Mummy is, as she describes it herself, a strange, wild novel that, to an audience nearer her future than when Loudon imagined it, is filled with striking similarities to our modern world, including a form of the internet. But it is also filled with brilliant flights of fancy. Her court ladies wear hair ornaments of controlled flames. Surgeons and lawyers may be steam-powered automatons. People holiday by moving their entire home on rails. The visionary technology setting contrasts with the morality seemingly gone awry as it falls to the reanimated mummy Cheops to try to find a role in this corrupted society. A lost curio of Victorian futurism waiting to be discovered. The Mummy is as bizarre and entertaining as its premise promises, and more. So I really wish I had gotten to The Mummy, but I just didn't. I didn't get there. So maybe I will in June, or maybe it'll wait till next year for Mary Shelley May 2024. Who knows? this has been my wrap-up game. If you want to know all of the books that I read, here is a grid. You can find reviews for all of them on Goodreads or on my Bookstagram account. Both are linked in the link tree down below. And thank you for watching, and I guess now it's time to start all of that mood reading in June, and I'm very excited about that. Very, very excited about that. So yeah, let's go read.